Just to introduce myself to you guys a bit, I was a student about a year and a half ago. I went to university at Royal Holloway. You might have heard of it. The university claims London status, but isn't actually in London. It's in the kind of leafy suburbs of Surrey. So I count myself a London student at one point, but it was never really true. And I now work for a Christian charity that basically helps students have an opportunity to hear the claims of Jesus and consider them for themselves through events like this one today. So I'm really glad to be here to talk about the relationship between Christianity and environmentalism. And I think the relationship between environmentalism and any belief system, whether religious or not, hinges on a question. And it's this: can we save our world? Can we as human beings save our world? And so for the next 15-20 minutes, I'm really grateful for your time, as I'm going to present Christianity's answer to this question. And it's a question that I'm glad to offer an answer to today, as I recently had to face it myself. I was driving down south on the motorway and I passed under a bridge, and along it was this large yellow banner. In one corner was the Extinction Rebellion symbol, and across the rest of it in big black letters were the words, 12 years to save our planet. And the banner seemed to do its job, because as I drove under it, it filled me with a sense of dread. Dread that if this prediction is true, I won't see my 35th birthday. And the prick of guilt that in that moment, driving alone in a petrol car on a journey that you could consider non-essential, I recognised myself as part of the problem rather than part of the solution. It was a terrifying realisation. But it makes sense then why Extinction Rebellion have their large protests and their provocative banners, because if their predictions really are true, then we need to know and we need to react, don't we? Well, today, whether you're convinced of that message based on the UN's prediction that we only have 12 years, it's undeniable that we are in a climate crisis. We know that 18 of the 19 warmest years have happened since 2001. Our ocean's pH levels are too acidic, which is wiping out the bottom of food chains and having knock-on effects higher up. Carbon emissions hit a record high in 2019. And recent research is suggesting that we only have a 1% chance of reaching the Paris Agreement to keep the planet's temperature under 1.5 degrees. And you only have to look at Texas this week and what's been happening there to say that we are in crisis. Which is why this question I've been asked to speak on today is an important one. Can we save our world? Is there any hope? Can I make plans to celebrate my 35th birthday? Can we prevent what is being called an extinction event? Well, Extinction Rebellion acknowledged that a key part of their rebellion is grief. See, the more that you see the damage, the more you face that overwhelming sense of hopelessness. Hopelessness that we can't seem to reverse the decay that we've caused to the world. We can't save ourselves from ourselves. Just this morning, there's an article of David Attenborough saying the very same thing, that we're just too late. And all this echoes Greta Thunberg's speech that many of us will likely know off by heart by now. Her damning words being these: adults keep saying that we owe it to the young people to give them hope. But I don't want your hope. I don't want you to be hopeful. I want you to panic. I want you to feel the fear that I feel every day, and then I want you to act. See, her speech, it glimpses that change is possible, but it comes with the condemnation that we're already too late. And I think that's true because that change demands a lot. Firstly, it demands a global selflessness. Greta really drives it home in her speech that greed and wealth are the root problem. And when you look at Extinction Rebellion's website on how to act, they're more concerned with petitions rather than the uncomfortable individual sacrifices that this is going to require. And it also demands a global moral conviction that there are moral absolutes for right and wrong. Gus Speth, who is a founder of the Natural Resources Defence Council, said this in 2013, that the top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with these, we need a spiritual and a cultural transformation. And we scientists don't know how to do that. Because how do you convince an entire world in our post-truth age that their actions are wrong, selfish, greedy, or apathetic? How do you transform culture like that? So in our grief for this planet, facing an impossible task, it seems all we're left with is despair. Is that how you're feeling today as you join this Zoom call to answer this question? Despair? It's increasingly prominent feeling in our public conversations. Here are some recent headlines on the climate crisis just in the last 2 years. Climate despair is making people give up on life. Iceland holds funeral for the first glacier lost to climate change. In India, children grapple with the aftermath of farmer suicides, nearly 60,000 of which have been linked to climate change. Derby University staff and students are given climate change anxiety therapy. Grief, frustration, guilt. The bushfires show the far-reaching mental health impacts of climate change. And my personal favourite, apocalypse got you down? Maybe this will help. And while Greta proposes that these feelings of panicked despair will move us to action, it doesn't seem to be working itself out in truth. And it was David Attenborough who said in an interview that this is precisely the reaction to avoid when making nature documentaries. He says that actually, if you make people despair, their response will only amount to a hedonist eat, drink, and be merry mentality. No, in the face of acknowledged grief, hope is needed. So I want to spend the rest of the time that I have with you looking at the story that the Bible tells, as I believe it is a story of grief, but one without despair. It's a story with hope, and we find our world and ourselves right at the centre of it. I suggested earlier that active change requires a global moral conviction of right and wrong. Well, the Bible very clearly provides this. We know we're in crisis because the Bible tells us there's a way this world should be. It begins with God in his infinite love, creating this world and placing humans to steward his creation. The earth was his delight, and he gave it to his people to care for it, to share in his delight over it. And we have been delegated authority to steward, to care for it, all the while remaining accountable to the God who loves this earth. And so the earth and its people ought to be in relationship with their creator. But we haven't remained that way. We've all turned away from God, choosing to live for ourselves and in our own ways. That selfishness, that greed, even the apathy that I've mentioned already, they're found rooted in each of us. Here's another quote from Greta. You, talking to the governments, you say that you hear us and that you understand the urgency. But no matter how sad and angry I am, I do not want to believe that. Because if you really understood the situation and still kept on failing to act, then you would be evil. And that I refuse to believe. While the evil that Greta refuses to believe in is real, and it is felt, it's what the Bible calls the problem of sin. And the result is a broken relationship between us and God, and the effects are a broken relationship between us and our world that he's created. The result is a broken relationship between us and God, and the effects are a broken relationship between us and the world that he's created. And what do you imagine God's reaction is to this? Like, consider what your reaction would be if you made something that you loved, gave it to someone else that you loved to take care of it, and they handed it back to you, ruined and broken. Well, God's reaction, as we see in the Bible, is grief. You can read in the Bible about a guy called Ezekiel. He was a prophet, meaning that God spoke directly to him. And God told him how heartbroken he was over what his people had done to the world. Justice was nowhere to be seen and creation was suffering. And to demonstrate this, Ezekiel lay on his left side, eating lentil bread for 390 days, over a year, as a sign of protest to this widespread problem. a kind of biblical protest of grief. But God knew that humans couldn't fix this broken divide alone. No, the Creator himself had to step into his creation to save it from itself. You may have heard the famous moral teachings of Jesus: love God and love your neighbour. Love God and love your neighbour. What do you hear in that statement? I think a direct link between the way that we treat God and the way that we treat this world. But Jesus came to do more than just provide moral teachings. He's described in the Bible as the firstborn over creation, meaning he came as God himself, stepping into his creation to reconcile this broken relationship, saving both us and the world. I said earlier that our politicians face that impossible demand to reverse the damage we've caused to this earth. Well, Jesus on this earth died and 3 days later rose again. His death and his resurrection are the clear display that God holds power to reverse decay, to reverse even death itself. Now, it may seem outrageous to you that I've just admitted I believe someone rose from the dead, but this was the most important moment in human history. It was God's way of saying, our broken relationship leads to death. Let me, in my infinite love, die in your place. Our restored relationship leads to life. Watch me, in my infinite power, conquer death. Just let that sink in for a moment. We grieve for this world's decay and the death we see around us, but there is one who can restore. We don't have to despair. I think this is the hope that David Attenborough is unknowingly pointing us towards if we are to face the problem in front of us. God has restored his relationship with those who believe in him, and he will restore the gift of his creation to us. And there's another promise that comes in the Bible which firms this hope for us, that Jesus will be returning and this world will be brought back to eternal flourishing. For those who have returned to God, they'll be part of this. And as we, with the planet, wait in eager anticipation for this day, we partner with God in the work that he is doing now to reveal this restoration. And it's this partnership between us and the Creator that I think makes Christianity and environmentalism the most livable relationship. That is, the relationship between caring for the environment and a belief system that can be truly lived out and sustained day to day. As I come to an end, here are the reasons I hope you've seen in the Bible story that form this. We have a basis for right and wrong. When environmentalism demands a global moral conviction, we can look to the authority of this universe's very creator and say with him, this is not how it should be. This is how it ought to be. Also, his authority demands that life is given real dignity. We aren't organisms just formed by chance, and each brushstroke of his creation is deliberate and it's beautiful. As I return to the question I asked earlier of how we could motivate the impossible demand for selflessness, I imagine that all of you can relate to the feeling that you're not doing enough. Whether it's those small sacrifices we're told to make individually, or the task of lobbying the corporations at the top, it's undeniable that none of us can follow through on this perfectly. And it's even harder to remain selfless when no one is watching. But as I said earlier, all of our work is seen all of the time, and it's done in partnership with God himself. And where I am doing environmentalism imperfectly or falling short, this guilt doesn't paralyze me. I'm able to repent, to confess that this isn't good, and to seek God's help to be better. And I'm able to do this because I know that my efforts will never be enough to save this world. not because we're helpless and doomed in the uncertainty of what's to come, but because Jesus has already done the ultimate work to save this world. And so I will spend 30 seconds cleaning out my yogurt pots so that I can recycle them. I'm doing my best to stop buying the jeans that Oxfam say use 20,000 litres of water to make, because these things are a meaningful result of my relationship with God. And I am outraged and I am heartbroken by the greed and consumerism that is destroying this planet, because I want this world to look more like God intended it to. Well, UCL's Events Week this week is the question of what now? What do we do in the face of this if it's true? Well, I think it's this, that as I drive under that motorway banner that I mentioned at the start, I'm not overwhelmed by this despair. I can carry my grief for the environment because I have hope. I said at the start that if it's true that we only have 12 years to save our planet, then of course we should be putting up banners everywhere and telling people. Well, if what the Bible says about Jesus is true, the claim that one day he'll return, then of course the Christian Union here want to put on more events like this to tell people and give them a chance to react. So if you've got questions from what I've just said, now is your time. There's a Slido link, I think it's been put in the chat with the code to use. We'll give you 2 minutes. I'd love you to start thinking about some questions, not just about the environment, but about the claims of Jesus. And also after today, continue this conversation with someone from the CU, whether it's someone you know in the breakout groups afterwards, or just via their social media. That is all I have to say though, so I'm going to hand back to Hannah.
Amazing, thank you so much, Naomi. That was really encouraging and hopeful. Great. Do keep on getting your questions in as I ask them to Naomi now. So the first one we have is, why can't I just live an environmentally friendly life without being a Christian?
You can. I'm not saying that only Christians are capable of caring for the planet, and if you're not a Christian today, then you clearly don't care for the planet. Please don't hear it as that. That's not what I'm trying to say. But if you're not a Christian, the kind of opposite side of that potentially is material atheism, the belief that we're just formed by chance and that after we die, there's nothing. And I think my question back to you, and again, maybe join me in a breakout group after so we can talk more, is, well, then why would you care for the environment? If you don't believe that there's going to be this new creation ushered in, that there's something meaningful about the reason why this world was created and designed, and it's intentional in its beauty, why would you care for the environment? I imagine it's just so we can prolong this world for as long as possible. We can do what we can for future generations. But I wonder really what is at the heart of that. And also, as I said in my talk, I think the relationship between Christianity and caring for the environment is the most livable, meaning that it's the one that frees us from this feeling of despair and being overwhelmed in the face of how much there is to do. I look at many friends I know who do care for the environment very well as non-Christians, but when you talk to them, the conversations are without hope, and it causes them a lot of stress, a lot of grief and anxiety. So I also think how good it would be to care for this planet as you already do, it sounds like, keep doing that, but doing it with a sense of hope rather than a sense of this panic and despair. But I'd love to hear more from you, so catch me in a breakout group afterwards if that was your question.
Thanks. So our next question, we've had quite a lot of questions along the similar lines, so I'll kind of paraphrase them together. But if the world will end anyway, according to the Bible, or if God's in control, like we know he is there any point in being environmentally friendly?
I don't think that is what the Bible says. I don't think the Bible does say the world's going to end. It says that God's going to come and restore this world. He's going to make all things new. Not that he's going to make new things, but all things will be made new. They'll be restored. So, as I said in my talk, it's kind of that thing of partnering with God, that he's already done that work through the life of Jesus. And raising him to life again. That's a reflection of what he's going to do with this world and creation itself. And we're kind of ushering that in with him in partnership, revealing those glimpses of that coming. And if God is in control, for me, that gives me more ease about caring for the environment, that I know I'm not doing it on my own, as I've kind of already said. There's a quote from, we attribute it with Martin Luther, the German monk, not the racial activist, but supposedly he said, or someone said, if I knew that Jesus was coming tomorrow, I'd plant a tree today. Which when I first heard that, I thought, well, why would you? Jesus is coming tomorrow. Surely you would just get excited about that. Why would you go planting trees? But kind of behind that viewpoint is that I'd plant a tree today, because how exciting for that tree tomorrow to be brought into the new creation, to be made new by the work of Jesus. And also just that partnership to bring that in is something we get to take great joy in. So I think there is a real urge to care for the environment as Christians that isn't lost just because God is in control or because it's going to be made new. Actually, it gives us that purpose to be part of it.
And kind of in a similar line, even if we have hope in Jesus, he won't be able to reverse climate change. So are we just spiritually comforting ourselves?
Again, I think I'd love to know your basis for saying that Jesus can't reverse climate change. The promise of the Bible is that he will. If you're asking that question because you've not read the Bible before and you're seeking out Christianity and its claims, start with Genesis and then go to Revelation, and you'll see that the biblical story begins in a garden and ends in a garden. And it's a garden that begins good, loved by God, given to his people as a gift. But as I said, it's ruined, it's broken. And at the end, it's restored. And the picture that we see in the book of Revelation, this kind of vision that God John has of what's to come, is beautiful, it's glorious. And there's no signs of climate change, the damage that's been done, because God has the power to restore all things. And so he's coming to restore the effects of climate change and this new creation, and also our own brokenness. Like, we're not lost in the center of what's going on in this world. As I say, the problem is a problem of evil, a problem of sin. And so just as we can kind of confidently say that there's nothing we could do that will so break this world beyond God's power to restore it, it's the same for you as well. There's no sin, no evil in you that you could push so far that God is not capable of restoring you. And I think if God is capable of restoring my life from death, from sin, then he can also do so much more for the environment, for this planet as well. Yeah,
thank you. That's such like a hopeful message to have. So the next question then, should we work with organisations that go against beliefs in the Bible in order to combat climate change?
I think on one hand, yes. If they're doing good for the environment, join with them. Tell them about the claims of the Bible as you do it with them, if you're concerned about that. As I said, it's not, you can't not care for the environment unless you're a Christian. That's not what I'm trying to say. But I think see the bigger picture, that again, God's heart is not only to restore the planet and the environment, it's also to restore our relationship with him. And so there are many Christian organisations. I live just down the road here from Tear Funds, and their whole mission statement is about this kind of horizontal and vertical relationship. I've got that the wrong way around. Vertical, horizontal relationship. That they see that actually in loving God really well as Christians, that means loving this world really well as Christians. And all of it is kind of in this partnership across the divide. So I think, support the environment where you can, do what you can, but I see the bigger picture, that's God's bigger picture. But the reason he restores the environment is because he's restoring our relationship to live in eternity with him. And don't lose sight of that in your own care for the environment.
We've also had, I guess, a kind of like follow-up question from some of the stuff you've already mentioned. So what about parts of the Bible that describe the new creation as something new and different to the present creation rather than a refurbishment?
I think again it's in that phrase of making all things new. It will look new, it will look different because there'll be no sin. It's almost hard to imagine a world without sin. It's so rooted into everything that we see and do as human beings, all that we've done to this world. Even I read passages in the Bible about the new creation and almost can't picture it. It almost feels so overwhelmingly beautiful that my mind can't comprehend a world without sin, without evil, without death and suffering. So in that sense, things will look so different, so new. But in the same way that it's Genesis was kind of the first picture, the first beginnings of creation, that first garden, that's just the first glimpse into the new creation. And so it won't be something totally unknown to us. It'll be the same thing that God started with, but made new in the sense of made new in life that he gives without sin, without judgment for sin through the work of Jesus. And that will look new to us, but it's something that God hasn't already glimpsed to us in creation.
We've also had quite a lot of questions about practical tips for living in an environmentally friendly way. So if you have any practical tips of what to prioritize first, that would be great. And also how to kind of encourage others to be more environmentally conscious.
Yeah, I think I answer this question as someone who is not doing it all, is just trying to be better than the day before. So there's a difference in the kind of small individual sacrifices we make, as I said in my talk, and the bigger movements to lobby corporations at the top. And I think sometimes I feel like, okay, last week I swapped to using reusable face wipes. What is that doing when I live down the road from these big corporations who are destroying the planet as much as I am? And lots of the effects of climate change I won't actually see, but they're happening in other countries and causing poverty that have no effect on my life, but I know is happening, and what do I do? But I think it is that thing of starting small. So using reusable products, it's really hard in a pandemic. We're being asked to use single-use plastics after years of trying to move to ban them. But where you can, seek out reusable stuff and shop secondhand. There's loads of small practical things, and I think there's lots of websites that offer you advice on that. But in terms of other people, then, when we do feel like our actions feel very small compared to others, there's lots of ways that your church could be getting involved if this is coming from a place of someone who goes to church. There's a charity, I think Roche is the name of them, where they've put together just some encouragement towards local churches through an award system to basically measure how much the church is already doing and how much more it can be doing in its context to work sustainably for the environment. So maybe it's worth chatting to your church about what you could be doing in your services, in your teaching, and also just in your work in the community to encourage sustainability and care for the environment. And I think talk to your councils, listen to what your councils are doing. I live in Richmond in Twickenham, and we don't collect food waste here. And I didn't really mind it at first, but I've actually seen it as a real problem. And it's something that I would love to actually be able to kind of talk to my local council about, is why we don't collect food waste here, because it does have such an impact on the environment. So look for those little things that you can speak into, but always do it with that bigger picture as a Christian, that God's purpose is to restore relationships, and we do this in partnership with him.
Thanks, that was all really helpful. I think we'll just ask one more question, and potentially this might be something that you want to discuss more with the person who asked it afterwards. But how do you as a Christian find the balance between the earth having an inherent value and humans being created in the image of God?
I think if I'm understanding this correctly, it's, I guess, in those moments when we're asked to make a decision, do I not use any single-use plastics, but then in a pandemic I'm being asked to, what is the balance between that decision making? I think, as we see in the creation story, that human beings are given the image of God. We're breathed in God's breath, we're given a soul. We see that actually we are placed at the center of God's creation, that we are his ultimate true delight, is his relationship with humanity. And that's also his greatest concern, is restoring our relationship to him, freeing us from the brokenness of our sin and allowing us back to know him in his presence. And so I think that's also my same priority as a Christian, is seeing my friends, my family know the same relationship that I have with God, with my creator. That is what I'm most concerned about, particularly in the knowledge that Jesus is returning, and everyone that I know will have to stand before him, either acknowledging him as Lord, as firstborn over creation, that phrase in the talk, or rejecting him and facing consequences for that. That is what my heart really beats for. But that at no point do I lose sight of the environment and my care for it. And as I say, it's all a reflection, a result of what I experience of my love from God is my love for this planet as well. And so I do what I can. And I think it's important that we do what we can for the environment and for this world and its inherent value. But my concern is for people and our relationship with God. And I don't think the two cancel one another out, but I think that is where my priority would lie. If that unsettles you, then do find me in the breakout group afterwards. I'd love to talk more about it if I've misunderstood your question, or you want to move back on that.
Great. There'll definitely be an opportunity afterwards if you want to stay behind, kind of ask more questions, to discuss with Naomi about what she's just talked to us about. But thank you so much, Naomi, for speaking to us today. And also thank you to everyone that has come. It's been really great to have you all here.